Hello and welcome to the Diabetic Podcast. I'm Justin. I have type 1 diabetes, and on here I talk all things diabetes tech, news, management, and beyond. Today we're getting into a very, very interesting story. It is the history of DIY Loop, one of the first automated insulin delivery systems where CGMs could talk to insulin pumps to dose for insulin. It's the system that I can run on my iPhone and my Apple Watch. This is an incredible story of a group of very smart people who would develop the best diabetes treatment system at the time and release it as a gift to the world. Loop came at a time when glucose level trends and data history from CGMs were not accessible to the user. Not like today when you can go on your phone and look at Dexcom Clarity. And this was long before T-Slim's Connect IQ and Omnipod 5's closed-loop systems. In fact, you could even say that Loop pushed Big Pharma to get to where we are today. I'm speaking with Pete Schwamb, one of the early developers of DIY Loop. He played an integral role in developing Loop, working to crack the frequencies of Medtronic and Omnipod pumps to control them, and built a key device known as the RileyLink, which was named after his daughter, who has type 1 diabetes. Pete continues to maintain Loop with a group of others, and I even ask him about what we can expect in the future for DIY Loop and a possible FDA-cleared system known as Tidepool Loop. Keep in mind that anything you hear on this podcast or content on my social media and YouTube channel is not medical advice. Always consult with your physician before making changes to your healthcare. All right, let's get into the discussion. Pete, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure.
Let me just tell you, this is probably for me the most anticipated episode I'm doing this first season of my podcast. I am so excited about talking to you, learning more about Loop, because I just find it to be a fascinating application and have such an interesting history. Before I want to introduce you, but before we get to you and your background, can you just tell my viewers or listeners what is DIY Loop?
Yeah, so DIY Loop is a automated dosing system that was it's not written by a medical corporation, it's written by people that have diabetes, for people that have diabetes, to help them manage all the decisions that you have to manage throughout the day when you have type 1.
Now, can you give us a little bit of background on who you are and then kind of everything that led you to the point of developing this system? What did it take to get there?
Yeah, but it's a long story, right? I've heard this story repeated by a lot of people. Like, you're a parent and you have a kid that gets diagnosed and you want to do whatever you can. And so people have gone and they've created all sorts of crazy things. Night Scout came that way. People, it's a frustrating disease because it doesn't have a cure. There's no, you as a parent, you kind of feel helpless and you want to do something. So it changed my life in a big way. And basically, I was frustrated by the lack of ability to get access to the data that I could see on her pump. So I could see her blood sugar, my daughter Riley. I could see her blood sugar, but I would have to ask her to take her pump out of its holster, interrupt. She's 6 years old. She's playing around, having a good time. And I'm starting to worry. I haven't seen her blood sugar in a long time. I have to figure out what it is. And, this happens many times throughout the day. And then it's just frustrating. So I started thinking there's got to be a way for me to get this data, and the current methods were you could install this Java applet on your.
What year is this?
So this is she was diagnosed in 2013. So
okay.
She was on a pump and CGM later in the year. So this is probably December of 2013. I'm trying to get the data off, and there's it's a Java applet. This is ancient technology. In 2013, it was ancient. And, I'm having a hard time doing it. I'm sure nobody else is able to do this. And I was, thinking there's got to be some way. So that's kind of the start of that path. And it ended up me going down roads of learning how to do radio frequency, reverse engineering, how to figure out what the protocols that the pump used to talk to the sensor and the pump used to talk to this other device that we got. And then build a little device that could listen to that communication and put it on my phone.
Yeah, so I want to we're going to get into that a little bit later, but like, so are you saying at the time pumps didn't provide the data for you to easily access? Like, how were you able to access it, and what wasn't available that is today?
Yeah, so this was a time when even being able to see, live data on your phone, like it just wasn't a possibility. Like, you couldn't see it on the web. You couldn't, you could see it if you had the device in your hand. But for a parent, that's really tough. Especially parents of young kids. That's pretty commonplace now. Dexcom made a lot of strides in the years since then, and you have this was before Dexcom Share, so those things have filled that need. But the industry seems like it's still playing catch up to a lot of the things that we've developed in the DIY space.
How did you get involved with the DIY space, specifically with Loop?
Yeah, so I built this device. It's called a RileyLink after my daughter Riley, and I was using it to just be able to monitor her blood sugar. And what exactly did that do? The RileyLink. That let me know, I didn't have to go and get the pump out of her holster and see, I need to know her blood sugar throughout the day, as a young kid. She started acting grumpy. Maybe she's low. Maybe she needs some carbohydrates. Maybe she,
So just so people know, are you saying did you create, people need to know, you created this, right? This RileyLink named after your daughter, right? Yeah. You created this, how did you just created this one day in your garage? How'd that happen?
No, I have a tiny bit of electrical engineering background. I had an uncle that was into it, and I actually started college as that, but I switched to computer science very shortly. But when this came about, my only options for being able to have a chance at getting this data was to try to figure out if I could intercept this stuff. So I took two devices, one little prototype board that would listen to 915 megahertz comms from the pump, and another Bluetooth device. And I learned out how these things work and wired them together. So it was just you have the two little circuit boards and their wires connecting each other. And then figured out using another tool called an SDR, software defined radio. This is a tool that can let you listen to any sort of radio that's going on. I could see the data going, figured out how to decode it, wrote some firmware on one of those chips so that it could listen to that data and then send it and make it available via Bluetooth to my phone.
And what was the pump that you were pulling the data from, that frequency you figured out?
Yep, this was a Medtronic pump. It's one of the early 523 Medtronic paradigm pump. And so then I could, after we had this clunky little thing that I could package up together, but it was obviously a problem that's nothing that you would want to carry around and have expect it to keep working. It's just a bunch of wires and a couple circuit boards and some batteries. So I dove into how do you design a PCB and figured out how to put that circuit that I'd built as two different parts onto a single PCB, and then order the little parts and figure how to do all this soldering with the tiny little parts, and made a little board that worked, and it was something that we could carry with, and I could get the data.
And this was just you, you're the only one at this point that has this.
Right. Yeah.
You create one functioning device at this time.
Yeah, and it was slow going, right? Because it's not my job. It's I'm doing software of the day, and I'm doing this hardware hacking at night. So it was over the process of a year trying to get this thing to really work, and but at the point where it was working, I think I started, that also coincided with me discovering some other things, that there were other people out there doing things like Night Scout, and there was another guy, Ben West, who, amazingly smart and capable guy, had actually figured out a lot more about the protocol, not on the radio side, but he had figured out, so there's a all the radio comms are kind of wrapped in what you need to do the radio. Once you unwrap the radio, there's another set of commands inside that are the actual commands that go back and forth to read a blood sugar value or to send a a command to the pump. He had figured out all these commands using not a custom device, but a device that Medtronic provided called a RileyLink stick. And this was the stick that this is the stick that I would use to try to use that Java applet to try to download the data. But he had taken this stick and used it to talk to the pump and figured out a whole slew of commands. And this is the eventual decoding that made OpenAPS possible and made Loop possible. So Ben hadn't done all this work in figuring out these commands. I don't know if this whole thing would have started. I really credit Ben with kind of being one of the main people to unlock this possibility.
What year is this when you finish RileyLink, roughly?
So 2013, so 2014, I think was it 2015?
Okay, and then this is also, you were doing this and then you met Ben West, who was also working on this?
I came across a tweet by him on Twitter, I think. And then, kind of reached out, and I think we also started I started a little GitHub, it's a place where all this code is shared. There was a messaging app. I think it might still be running, but they don't really support it. It's kind of, on life support right now, but it was a place where you could go and you could, create some discussion around a particular code base. And there were a bunch of people on there all talking about doing this stuff, and I shared what I had done, and there were a lot of interest, a lot of people excited about this idea that you could, not have to use the RileyLink stick. And and Nate Ratcliffe was one of the people that saw that. And
we're going to get into Nate Ratcliffe in just a second. Before we do, I just want to show everyone who's watching on YouTube, I'm holding an orange link, which an orange link wouldn't exist if there wasn't a RileyLink. I came into the game a little late. I was just diagnosed 2 years ago. But I'm on Loop, and I was using for a while this orange link, which looks like an AirPods Pro case. It's orange, and it holds 2 AAA batteries. But all of my friends would be like, oh, your AirPods are orange? I'm like, nope, this is not that. Please don't open it. So you and Ben West are working on your own things. You get connected, and you're connected to all these people on Gitter. And I feel like this whole group of people you're talking to, Nate Ratcliffe, who's coming in, who's going to help create Loop, you're all the formation of what we call the We Are Not Waiting movement. Am I right?
Yeah, I think so. That particular term came more out, I think, about the people that were creating Night Scout. And so, again, like there's a whole group of people. They're not completely, it's not like an organization, right? They're kind of doing their own thing. And I believe that term came out of some of the people that worked in that space.
It's fantastic. Okay, Nate Ratcliffe. How do you get connected to him, and then is he working on it already, or what goes on next with the formation of Loop?
I think he jumps into the Gitter group, and he Toby Canning, this other guy who is really interested. He's like, we should make these things. We should find out a way to make them at scale. And I was like,
RileyLinks?
Yeah, the RileyLink, and I that was, I'm like, I don't know. This thing is just it's working for me, but I don't really know if this is something that we could really scale up. But he just goes ahead and he just like finds somebody that can take a schematic, the schematics I did, and start making them. And this guy made, we started a forum for collecting orders, and this guy made, I think, maybe 100 of them or something, and sent them out. And this is all kind of happening at the same time as we're figuring out how to use the RileyLink in maybe some novel ways, like using Ben West's commands to, like, in theory, we could control the pump using a RileyLink. But it turns out that when we went to do that, the commands just wouldn't work. Like, we could hear all the comms, we could see all the comms, but when we tried to send a command, like, it just wouldn't work. And it turned out that a very technical detail in how we made these things using a standard, like when you make the schematic for the 950 megahertz chip, like there's a crystal that determines the frequency of everything, like down to all the, each little message, how fast you send the message. And it turned out that the pump could understand us when we sent just a shorter little messages, but the timing was off just enough when you got to the longer messages that were required for bolusing that it failed. And so we had to go kind of back to the drawing board. I figured out what was going on, got a new type of crystal that was a slightly different frequency, and we could use that to match the frequency. And so, but at this time, all these RileyLinks have been sent out. So people sent the RileyLinks back to me, and on this board, on this little thing back here, that little red thing, like I took these tiny little crystals off the boards and put a new one on, like each individually.
Wow.
It's like,
okay, so you you get the RileyLinks back, you send them out, and now people can, at this point, start sending instructions to their Medtronic pump for bolusing and stuff like that?
Yeah, so this is very early on in the both OpenAPS, and Loop has, like Nate has received this and is starting to think about, how he's going to write Loop. So there really isn't any sort of like thing that you could actually just get and start using. People are hooking these up to their existing OpenAPS, kits and trying to wire them up to, send the commands. And Nate is taking some of my code that I had written for the Bluetooth side of things on iOS, because I had a little app, that I used to watch Riley's blood sugar. He took some of that code and is starting to put it into what would eventually become Loop. And then he started sharing the Loop code with me. We started working on it together. He eventually got it finished. I had a timeline here.
And just for everyone, while you're looking that up, just for everyone listening, when Pete says Open APS, that stands for APS is Automated Pancreas System. So this is a time, right, Pete, where automated pancreas systems, automated insulin delivery systems like Omnipod 5, like T-Slim's Connect Q, and even Medtronics, these did not exist. This is why there was a need. And there, you felt the need. All of you felt the need of like, we need to be able to talk to our pumps using a phone. We need to be able to have, why don't we have our CGMs talk to our pumps, right? Like, this did not exist at the time.
Right. At the time, like the way the standard therapy was that your pump would be delivering a scheduled basal. So you had to figure out, kind of what your basal rate was, and you do this with your endo. And then you would bolus for meals. And then if you, for some reason, were getting high, you'd add more insulin manually, and if you were going low, you'd take carbs or whatever. And every single one of those decisions you had to make, and they are, can be in the hundreds in a day, right? And it was, I think the idea of automating insulin delivery had been around for a long time, but because of sensor quality, the sensors were noisy in the past, like a lot of people didn't feel it was feasible. And I think also the other idea was that, you need to have something that was smart enough to know what it should do, right? That you could manage your glucose. Well, it turns out that just being dumb, but doing it every 5 minutes, making a dumb, simple decision kind of based on traditional dosing, actually ends up being a life changer, right? Like all of a sudden, if you're making small changes every 5 minutes, but they're generally in the right direction, you end up with a completely different quality of life in terms of, how well maintained your blood sugar is and how often you have to intervene.
Yeah, I have to say, I am a very spoiled T1D, right? I was diagnosed 2 years ago. I came at this time when there were incredible CGM technology, insulin pumps, and technology that combined those two. And before that, I guess the last few years, there wasn't that, and Loop kind of filled that whole Loop and other systems. There's also Android APS and other ones as well that existed to fill that gap and take those 500 decisions you make in a day and make it a lot less, which is incredible. And it allows me, Loop and Omnipod 5 Connect Q for everyone who's on them, it allows us to really live in the moment more, not have to constantly be monitoring. And then when we get that alert, we can address it. Now, I want to get into Loop. And for everyone listening, we're going to be talking about Loop and its features. So if you came here to learn about that, we're going to be getting into that. But first, you need to tell me about this bounty. So I've been hearing that there was this time when you were all stumped on how to create some sort of connection for this system, and you crowdfunded money or something?
Yeah, so James Wedding, one of the Night Scout Foundation people, I think he knew about the Omnipod. I believe maybe his daughter was using Omnipod at that time, And he saw all this work around Medtronic pumps, right? Like the DIY community at that time was really focused on the DIY pumps, or sorry, the Medtronic pumps. And, he was like, well, can we crack the Omnipod? And, just a crazy idea. He put it out there, and, there were a lot of people interested. Like in the chat room, the Slack room quickly filled up, and there's a lot of excitement, people doing all sorts of things using SDR to try to see the radio, because the Omnipod had they call it a PDM that sent the commands and stuff. We knew that it was radio controllable, so we knew in theory like there should be a way to control this. That was another long long learning experience with a lot of frustrations, and I've written about those in the Medium article.
I read it.
that catalogs all the highs and the lows of that process. We'd think we were close, we'd think we almost had it, and then that wasn't it, and it would feel like, well, we really can't get what we need, and it felt like the project would die off. And then somebody's like, well, I'm gonna hook this up, I'm gonna get these people to actually open up the chip and take a look and see what's inside. And like, well, how is that gonna work? How can you actually dump firmware off a protected chip like that? But they did it, and it was quite an involved effort with a lot of different people all over the world, contributing to this. And,
well, you crowdfunded money, right? Like what, $40,000 or something?
I don't even remember what
to pay this person, right?
So I think there was even more invested than that. And then you talk about the amount of hours put in. Like the bounty itself was a small drop in the bucket compared to all these professional people's times that had all this experience putting massive hours into this. If you would have actually paid everybody what they put into this, you'd be probably talking maybe millions of dollars. I don't.
Yeah, and I have to say though, that's what makes Loop and all the people behind it so special, because these people, why did they work on it? Many of these people didn't even have diabetes. Like you had family members who were. You were creating technology, software, connections, diverging into like frequencies and playing operation to help people. And then that system, Loop, and other systems available are just out there for people to get for free. You're not asking for any money for them to use it, and you're also continuing to maintain it, which we'll get into in just a second. But I mean, that's admirable.
Yeah, I think the idea, a lot of us are, we have hobbies, or we're geeky, we love to work on these things. Like, these are fun things, and when the opportunity comes to take something that you're good at and that you enjoy and apply it in a place that's going to have an impact, right? That's kind of the holy grail of finding, meaning in your work.
We've got that background. Now, from the time you meet Nate, how many years? I think that was like 2014. What is it, 2 years that it takes to get Loop up and running for everyone?
Yeah, so I think it was June. It was around June 2015 where Nate started. Well, that's where Nate and I started sharing code. I gave him my code. He started working on his stuff. And I think it was about a little bit less than a year later, that he was actually running Loop. Like he had it dosing and controlling his pump. It took me a little bit longer to feel comfortable, doing that. Like insulin's a scary drug, right? It's a super scary drug, and handing that over to software. That I've been working in software a long time. There's no such thing as bug-free software. And, the idea that this, it was hard at first to do it, but, so we watched it like a hawk, right? Like we sat there and, stayed up all night watching it dose and watching it make the decisions. And, it did everything right. And, we kept, and as time went on, it was like, wow, this thing just works. And it does, we don't have, we're not having to deal with the lows and stuff. And it was very quick to all of a sudden be like, okay, this is made, we can sleep through the night now. We have alarms, if our blood sugar is going down low, we'll get alerted. But, there are a lot of safety checks in there, and there were a lot of other people using it. And, any bugs were found. Like, I think that's one of the advantages of this, this DIY community is, well, you have a little bit different control systems, but it's not like there aren't there aren't quality systems in place. The quality systems is that you have people that are committing their time to watching these systems closely and trying it in very real world scenarios, right? So one of the things that happens in the lab, is that you might be very strict and you might have a lot of checks, but it's the lab. It's a different environment than what you see in real life, and sometimes things get missed that way that we catch really fast in the DIY community.
Yeah. So it's 2015, June 2015. It's up and running, and just 6 months later, roughly, or it goes to kind of as like the Loop 1.0 or main version.
And then in October 2016, I think is when Nate left to work at Apple, and that's when that's when he released his 1.0. He wrote a great article on the road to 1.0.
I'm going to post both your Medium post and his in the description of this episode notes, because they're fascinating reads. They're what kind of started me on this journey of searching what the origins of Loop are. And I made a video when I was working at CNET. I made a whole video, and that's kind of the reason kind of how it brought me there, and just this whole journey. And I also made a Loop video on this YouTube channel, on my YouTube channel. So if people are watching, they want to see that, you'll see Loop. Okay, so now Loop is given to whoever really wants to take those files and grab them and build it themselves, because no one's building it for them. This is not an FDA cleared system. This is build at your own risk type thing. There are lots of community groups out there that will help with issues, and you can find those resources in the notes of my YouTube video, and maybe I'll put loopdocs.org in the episode notes as well if you want to learn more. Now, Pete, there were risks to this, right? You were putting a system out there that anyone could take, they could build it, and they could use it incorrectly. And that could lead to not so great circumstances, maybe death. What were the risks? What did you feel and the group feel were the risks by putting this out there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think if we didn't know that it was working, if it hadn't been changing our lives, I think the risks would be too much, right? Like, I can't, there's nothing I can say like, it's not risky. Diabetes itself, though, is inherently a risky disease. When you look at the number of people that have horrible issues, for simple mistakes, not using automated therapy, but, just manual injections, and that was one of the things that actually convinced me to, get kind of over one of my hurdles was, I was up late one night, and Riley her blood sugar had been high for hours, and she wasn't coming down, and we've been giving more insulin, and, it's like I'm knowing in my head that using the correction ratios that we have, it wasn't providing enough insulin, and so I'm sleep deprived, and I'm trying to figure out how much more insulin to go, and I bump it up a little bit more, and then she starts coming down, and it's just like, okay, and people have this experience where they're like the rage bolus, all these kind of things. People aren't perfect, and they're making mistakes all the time too, and so we're living. So the baseline for, the baseline of risk is already very high, just starting with diabetes. I feel that the code and the software that we were providing reduces risk. Like, it can't bring it to zero. There's still risk out there. Something bad can still happen. People could misuse stuff. But it was changing things in a huge way to make us a lot safer. And so from that perspective, it feels like it's almost, it'd almost be a liability not to put it out there. You'd be doing a disservice not to share it. And
but with the risks, were you worried about like prosecution? Like, was that a fear?
We do try to be clear about what this is. I don't want Loop to be a product. I'm not trying to support a product that I'm I'm making for people when I work on DIY Loop. I'm sharing things that I think help me and they could be useful to other people if they decide that they want to use them. And so I want to be clear about that when we're talking about this. I think there are companies that are trying to make this a product, something that is actually something that is designed for an end user to take and use. And as a product and a marketed product, like, it should go through the FDA, it should go through all these things, it should have support. Like, you should have somebody that is a company that's going to say, we take responsibility for this product that we are making for you. We are providing you a service of this product. DIY is not a service. It's not a product. It's a thing, and it has gotten over the years easier and easier for people to use and download, and it starts to feel like it gets closer and closer to a product. But we want to try to keep that distinction of this is people sharing what works for them. We want to keep the DIY community free to be trying these things and to be doing the things that really do push the envelope for new therapy options and show industry that you can be doing this stuff, but doing it in a way that isn't trying to get everybody to use this. I don't think most people should be using DIY. I really hope that we can bring these solutions we can bring interoperable solutions where people can choose their sensor, can choose their pump independently, and they can do it with a real product with a company backing it. That's how this should happen.
But I think it's also important for people to know this exists for the reason of how can we push pharma and the companies that are doing this FDA cleared, how can we push them in the direction of a lot of the great things that Loop does? Let's get into the Loop app and kind of what features it has, what we like about it, what you think could be coming. I'll start. I think one of my favorite features about Loop is the fact that you could program glycemic index of foods. This is a game changer, I think. This means you can choose how quickly the foods you're eating. When you're programming the carbs, you can also tell it how quickly this food's going to hit your blood sugar, right? So orange juice, obviously that's going to be sooner than pizza. And what the app does is it gives you three main emojis, which is like adorable. And then you can go through and choose through other ones that also will help you. Like when you tap ice cream, it kind of just does it for you. It tells you, oh, it's going to probably do this. Obviously there's some thought that needs to go into it and use case scenarios of just using it. But that's what I love. What would you say is like one or two features of Loop that you think just sets it aside from what is FDA cleared right now? What makes it unique?
Well, one of the things is bolus from a watch, right? Like that's one of the simple things that Loop has had since day one. It was so cool, and we're like, industry, you need to do this. One of the biggest things about diabetes is being out in public and you're having to take out your controller or whatever, and people are looking at you like, what is that thing, or what are you doing? And having that just like that very subtle thing where you look at your watch, you tap a button, and boom, like nobody questions that.
It's amazing. It is you're right. It is like that is actually the coolest feature. I also asked Omnipod if they were going to have a tag along Apple Watch app, and they said that they're not going to say anything yet. But yeah. That is my favorite part. It makes it makes you need an Apple Watch, I think. If you're looping, get an Apple Watch.
It is a hugely, for the smallness of it and for the, it doesn't seem like it might not be that big of a deal, but it makes a huge difference for a lot of people. Not only that, alarms and stuff going to your wrist, and you have the haptic vibration for those kind of alarms to surface there makes a big difference. You're not beeping and buzzing. And, so that's one of the big ones. I think the remote, the support for remote caregivers through other apps, so right now it's not ideal, and we're making progress in a direction I think that'll help. But if you have Loop plus Night Scout plus Loop Caregiver app, you can be doing things, you can be keeping track on your loved one's diabetes very closely. You can also, for those, younger kids that are not doing any of their control, you can actually be doing remote commands. Now, this seems scary to people, but it done in a secure way with feedback and with good telemetry, like it allows you to, again, be safer than you would, to keep your daughter safe, because you know what's going on. You are, as a caregiver, you have a better idea generally what's going on and what's needed in different situations.
Yeah, and does that exist for any other systems out there?
No, there are no other systems that allow you to remotely adjust dosing. And and it's probably, watch might come sooner, but I think remote control is going to be a ways down the road.
Yeah. Do you think they want that and they're working toward that, pump companies? I'm
assuming that there are companies looking into it. I don't know, to any direct efforts, directly of any efforts like that. I think it involves a lot of risk, and cybersecurity is a very big topic at device manufacturers, and these larger companies are very risk averse.
I've told people, like, if someone got my phone and somehow and hated me and wanted me to die, and they got into my phone, they could do that.
Yeah.
Which is like, it's, but someone could also take your PDM and do the same thing.
They could
right?
also
It's not that much different.
They can walk up to you with a needle full of insulin.
Exactly. Right. These risks are here, and maybe the FDA cares about some of that stuff, but there's always going to be a way.
Yeah. Now, the reality is that we're dealing with risk every minute of the day, right? We are dealing with like the possibility of, even with correct dosing, your kid goes and jumps on the trampoline and they just ate and they've got a lot of insulin on board. The jumping on the trampoline stops your digestion. It enhances the effect of insulin. Your blood sugar is going to crash, and these are dangerous, very dangerous situations that you're confronting all the time. And
I give so much credit to you and other parents out there. Managing my own diabetes is already enough, but it's my burden to carry, and I hold that. But being a parent and also knowing how your kid is feeling in these lows and these highs and these scary moments, that's got to be so difficult. And for parents listening, like, you are just as much a warrior as people with diabetes, because you are fighting every single day. And also, so your child is going to live an incredible life just like anyone else, because of these systems that exist, not just Loop, but because of Omnipod 5 and Tandem's Connect Q and other automated systems. Like, you are having a child at the best time for diabetes. Don't worry. Okay, we got to move on to the future of Loop. What is one feature that you are working on with the Loop app? Is there something you can tell me that, like, I may have access to in the future that would kind of, like, I don't know, blow my mind or even just get me excited?
Yeah, so, I'm always working on a lot of different things. I think that one thing that I'm excited about that it ends up being pushed back a lot just because of the day-to-day, dealing with bugs, dealing with, this is, again, still, like, the DIY stuff is still basically my spare time. I work at Tidepool, and it is on Loop, but it's, I'm working on Loop, Tidepool Loop stuff there. And
yeah, we're going to get into that in just a sec.
And so, but the things that I would love to see are the things that help people with their settings, right? Understanding what are appropriate settings is very difficult. Setting up Loop for the first time and figuring out settings is very appropriate. And having Loop not only be able to, suggest settings or, give you an initial set that works based on what it's seen in some data that you can share with it, but also to, like, help as your diabetes changes, to help you change your settings and update.
Is that artificial intelligence or just algorithm or both?
Yeah, I mean, it's they're all the same. Like, there's no hard lines between these things, right? Like, Loop already does dynamically adjust to what it sees in your blood sugar and to some extent some of the historical stuff that it's seen.
I did not even know that.
Yeah, we could talk about the algorithm.
Okay, that's going to be another episode because I need to learn more about that. We're getting close to the end. I do want to talk about, though, let's talk about Tidepool, because I'm actually speaking with Howard Look from Tidepool very soon on this podcast. Or maybe that episode already came out. I don't know yet. But can you tell me what is Tidepool? And then kind of like tell me about Tidepool Loop, which is, well, I guess you can tell everyone what that is.
Yeah, so Tidepool is a nonprofit organization. It was started, Howard will give a much better summary, but very quickly, they wanted to try to be able to present all your diabetes data in one place. Like it used to be that you just see your blood sugar separate in one place, you go see your insulin data in another place, and very smartly wanted to put it together. They also, back in, I think it was early 2018, decided, had this crazy idea that they might be able to take Loop, the DIY version, and bring it to the FDA and make it available to everybody. And that's, I think that, that was I was also thinking about that at that time. There had been discussions. I'd been on calls put together with the JDRF, with the FDA, and with, members of the, high up members of many of the device manufacturers, talking about interoperability, because Loop was showing that you can take a Dexcom sensor and it can be used to control dosing on a Medtronic pump. And the FDA is trying to figure out how to do this, and wants, patients are wanting this, and industry needs to support it. But I had no idea how to start a company to bring a product like Loop through the FDA. But Tidepool did have a FDA experience, so they took on this role of bringing Tidepool, or bringing DIY Loop through the FDA, putting a quality system around it, putting risk management, helping develop, mitigate any risks that they identified through this process, and making, in essence, making Loop safer, and partnering with device manufacturers, because they had, already were working with many device manufacturers, partnering with them to make FDA approved versions of those device integrations for Loop and bringing that to market. And they've been doing a great job.
So obviously this is the goal, right? Like for you to one day have like an iPhone and any earbuds you want that aren't Apple, right? Like, or a watch that, and Apple's not doing this either, right? So like you understand that there's going to be some pushback from these pharmaceutical companies that don't want that. But we want that. The people want that. Kind of on the same topic, Omnipod Insulin pulled out, right? They were working with Tidepool Loop. Didn't they pull out from the partnership?
So the details are, maybe I can't go into the complete details, but there were parts of their submission that made it so that it would not be fully interoperable. And yes, that was not part of the plan. And whether or not Insulin comes back and eventually does want to continue its integration with Tidepool Loop. But yes, right now that's not, that particular integration is kind of on pause. So
yeah, I'm definitely disappointed about that.
Yeah,
but I do hope that
pods are great, and pods are, it's a great pump. Many people love them, and that should be a choice for people.
Yeah, and I hope either they come back and work with you, or and I know, I don't think Tidepool has announced major companies that are working with you yet for this interoperability, but I hope you do soon, and I hope they're available soon so people can get a taste of what DIY Loop is with Tidepool Loop.
Yes. Tidepool is working with other pump vendors.
Okay.
Active. We can't say who they are.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. Sounds good. Now, do you think DIY Loop will always be around? If Tidepool Loop comes out, is DIY Loop gone?
That's what I used to think and hope. As time has gone on, I've realized that there's probably always going to be a need. Like Tidepool is really, some of the things we're doing at Tidepool are looking at how we can make fast iterations of clinical studies, smaller, faster, iterations to keep up with the pace of innovation that we really need to get what people are needing. And that hopefully we'll be making good strides there. But there's always going to be different things or very smaller use cases that address a really important need for a smaller group of people. And I think, there are just things that don't make sense, for a larger company to try to take on, or they can't take everything on, right? And so having this rich groundwork out there that can be built upon, and these other experiments can be tried, I think is probably going to continue to be a really, really important part of the whole the whole system of things that are available to people. Again, I don't think that building apps yourself is a great choice for most people. I think that it's not the ideal choice for sure. Ideally you would have a company that provides what you need and provides it in a way where they are responsible. They're taking 100% responsibility for it, and they are supporting it, and they're doing all the due diligence that they need to do with the FDA to make sure it's safe.
Great. Last question. What do you think needs to change in the industry, specifically mainstream industry? What do you want to see?
I've got a list, but maybe we'll start with the biggest one is open interoperability in terms of pump specifications, CGM specifications, specify like the actual protocols that, and design with that in mind. You can design secure systems that allow the user to authenticate with the device securely, and you are doing so on an iPhone, which, yes, you could install other apps, but it is a secure platform. It is one of the most secure platforms you can have nowadays. Develop these hardware components so that they can take advantage of. So I think companies would want to have their device be the one selected by a developer who has a very novel idea at addressing some problem in this space, and they choose that manufacturer's pump because it's open. Right now, it's somebody has an idea, somebody wants to write an app, like they can't talk to a device manufacturer and say, "Oh, would you give me the specs for this?" That just doesn't happen now because device manufacturers haven't designed it with that in mind. That would be my dream if they did open this up, and it would have saved many years of reverse engineering these things, and we'd be ahead of where we are right now with that kind of support.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for talking to me today about all this. It's a fascinating story, and just like the heart behind it is truly, it's inspirational. It's helping so many people, and hopefully, and it already has, pushing pharma to do better and to get these features that Loop's providing, is showing that test case and being like, you can do this too. Whether or not they all sign on board for Tidepool, there's still good push and pressure because other people out there are managing their diabetes easier with these systems. So thank you so much. This was incredible, and I look forward to talking to you again in the future about that algorithm.
Thank you. It's been a blast.
Thanks for listening to today's podcast. Episodes come out every Monday on any podcast platform, plus YouTube if you want to see me in video. There are links to my YouTube channel and social accounts in the description of this episode. Until next time, I'm Justin, and I'll tech you later.